Our thought for today is, it's so hot and dry in Texas that the Baptists are now starting to baptize by sprinkling. The Methodists are using wet wipes. The Presbyterians and Lutherans are giving out rain checks. And the Catholics are praying for the wine to turn back into water. Today we look at the parable of what's called the parable of the rich fool, a rich man who became richer, a millionaire who became a multi-millionaire. I love what the great Chi Rodriguez, the great golfer, said when he was asked by an interviewer. Chi said, "I attribute becoming a millionaire to marrying my wife. Before I met her, I was a multi-millionaire." So this is called the parable of the rich fool, and it's occasioned when somebody comes up to Jesus and says, "Teacher, tell my brother to share the inheritance with me." Apparently there was a family dispute about the inheritance. In those days, the elder brother would get everything, and then if he was kind enough, he would give something to his younger brother. Apparently this was not happening. So Jesus says, well, it's not my job to settle this family dispute. But what he does, though, he uses this as a teaching opportunity, a teaching moment, and he warns people against greed and avarice, one of the 7 deadly sins, greed and avarice. He says, though one may be rich, one's life does not consist of possessions. So then he tells a parable. A parable is a story where Jesus uses an earthly image to teach a heavenly reality. He talks about a man who is already quite rich, but now his land produces a bountiful harvest, a bumper crop. Maybe he won the Powerball, so he's very rich now. He's even richer. Notice what he does. He doesn't pray about it. He doesn't ask God what he should do. Doesn't give anything to the poor, to the needy, to the homeless. He doesn't share anything with those less fortunate. Doesn't give anything to the temple. He talks to himself rather than talking to God. And within 2 sentences, he says the words "I" and "my" 12 times. What should I do? I do not have space to store my harvest. This is what I shall do. I shall tear down my barns and build larger ones. Then I shall store all my grain and other goods, and I shall say to myself, now as for you, you have so many good things stored up for many years. Rest, eat, drink, and be merry. So notice the word I, ego, which stands for ego, edging God out. That's what happens when we focus on ourselves. We edge God out. And he decides to retire and to live a pagan lifestyle. Eat, drink, and be merry. That was the Roman pagan philosophy. So he figured he had many years of retirement. And yet God said to him, you're a fool, because this night your life will be demanded of you. Not only will you die tonight, but you'll have to render an account of your life and how you lived your life. Did you help others? Did you help the needy and the poor? It says, and all these things, all the grain, all the money you stored up, where will they go? There's an ancient Arabic saying that there are no pockets in a shroud. You can't take anything with you. If you listen to Bishop Barron's homily this morning, it's called You Can't Take It With You. Very good sermon. So there are no pockets in a shroud. Also, I like the modern expression, there are no U-Hauls on the back of hearses. Yeah, I've done hundreds of funerals. I've never seen a hearse with a U-Haul on the back heading to the cemetery because we can't take it with us. I remember the great holy Jesuit, Father John Hardin, who's up for beatification. Father John went to visit an elderly man on his deathbed. This was a multi-millionaire. And when he went to this man's mansion in Chicago, the man was dying of cancer, and he had stacked around on his bed, around his pillow and around both sides, about $500,000, all in $100 bills, big stacks of $100 bills, all on his bed. And yet he was dying of cancer. That's how greedy he was. He was so possessed of his possessions. He didn't possess them, they possessed him. Fortunately, Father John was able to administer him, and the man went to confession and received the holy sacraments. But contrast that with someone like a Catherine Drexel, Back in the 1920s, she was the heiress of a huge banking and railroad fortune. When her parents died, a teenager, she inherited $15 million back from the turn of the last century, worth today $700 million. What did she do? She went to Rome and wanted to give the money to the poor, to the Native American Indians, African American Indians, and the Pope says, yes, do that, but don't just give your money, give yourself. And so she became a nun, and she founded hundreds of orphanages and Xavier University in New Orleans and many schools for those in need. And during her life, she gave away all that vast fortune, and she certainly stored up great treasure in heaven, because we know we can't die with anything. Everything we have goes to others, your kids, your grandkids. But Jesus says what matters most is not growing rich in the sight of this world, but growing rich in what matters to God. Well, what matters to God? It is storing up treasure in heaven. What does that mean? Well, growing in holiness, growing in virtue, growing in faith, hope, and charity. You're doing that right now by coming to Mass. Every Holy Communion you receive is making you a spiritual millionaire. Every rosary that you pray, every prayer that you say, every time you spend an hour in Eucharistic adoration, you're becoming a spiritual millionaire. That's what a saint is. A saint is a spiritual millionaire. They store up treasures in heaven. They do works of faith, hope, and charity. They give to the poor, almsgiving, prayer, sacrifice. That's how we grow in holiness. And that's what we were reminded of today, is the shortness of life. Since we can't take anything with us, yes, of course, it's important to provide for your family, food, clothing, and shelter. That's very important. And yet, Jesus says, don't live that pagan philosophy of selfishness and focusing just on yourself, and the pagan philosophy of eat, drink, and be merry. Instead, store up, Jesus says, treasure in heaven, and you truly will become a millionaire when it comes to God, because a saint is a spiritual millionaire.